Gendarmenmarkt, for many the most beautiful square in Berlin, is back. After more than 2 years of renovation, it reopened in mid-March 2025. But the reactions were mixed. Yes, there was praise here and there, but more often there was criticism, even ridicule. The term stone desert keeps coming up. But why? How was the square redesigned? And why is there so little greenery? What did the Gendarmenmarkt used to look like? In this video, we'll take a look at the history of this square, from its beginnings in the 17th century to the latest redesign. The square was laid out starting in 1688, based on plans by Johann Arnold Nering. It was part of Friedrichstadt, a Baroque city expansion commissioned by Elector Friedrich I, who later became king in Prussia. At first it was called Lindenmarkt, then Mittelmarkt, or Friedrichstadt Market. Many Huguenots settled in Friedrichstadt, French Protestants who had been driven from their homeland. The great elector had already offered them refuge in 1685 through the Edict of Potsdam, with freedom of religion and civil rights. Starting in 1701, 2 churches were built. In the north, the French Friedrichstadt Church for the French Reformed community, and in the south, the German Church for the German Reformed and Lutheran congregations. Under Friedrich II, the 2 churches were topped with identical dome towers between 1780 and 1785, following designs by Karl von Gontard. From 1787, the square was paved and continued to be used as a market. In 1799, it received its current name, Gendarmenmarkt, named after the cuirassier regiment Gendarme, which had its stables here until 1773. Between the 2 churches, a small French comedy theatre was built, replaced in 1802 by a large national theatre with 2,000 seats, designed by Carl Gotthard Langhans, the architect of the Brandenburg Gate. Just 15 years later, a fire destroyed the building, an opportunity for Carl Friedrich Schinkel. He designed a new theatre in the classical style on the same site. Since 1821, it has shaped Gendarmenmarkt. As the Prussian State Theatre, it became one of the leading German-speaking stages. Political events also shaped Gendarmenmarkt. In 1847, the so-called Potato Revolution began here, a protest against rising food prices. Just 1 year later came the March Revolution of 1848. On March 18th, barricade fighting broke out in the streets around the square. Soldiers were to be prevented from advancing into the neighborhoods. 4 days later, the 188 people killed in March were solemnly laid out on the steps of the German cathedral. A massive funeral procession with over 100,000 participants began here. In the fall of 1848, the First National Assembly met in the theatre, a brief moment of parliamentary hope. In 1859, to mark the 100th birthday of Friedrich Schiller, the foundation stone for his monument was laid, designed by Reinhold Begas, inaugurated in 1871. Schiller stands on a tall pedestal surrounded by allegories. Poetry, philosophy, history, and drama. An expression of the 19th century's bourgeois ideal of education. Back then, the square was also landscaped, with lawns, ornamental shrubs, and lavish floral displays. In 1895, City Garden Director Hermann Mächtig redesigned it again, as a decorative square with symmetrical flower beds, low greenery, and clear sightlines. Since there were now 14 market districts in Berlin, it was no longer used as a market. A photo from 1900 clearly shows what the square looked like at the time. Some trees from that era still stand today, including a Japanese pagoda tree and 2 maples. During the Weimar Republic, a rationalization began in 1920. All large groups of shrubs were removed. In 1928, there was even a design competition, featuring Peter Behrens, Erich Mendelssohn, Hugo Haring. But none of it was implemented. In 1936, the Nazis radically changed the square. For the Olympics, it was to become a parade ground. A large square area with a grid pattern of paving stones was created in front of the theatre. The Schiller monument was removed, supposedly for safety reasons. Each year, boys from the German Young People's Organization were inducted into the Hitler Youth here, and the paving pattern helped guide their formation marches. The rest of the year, Gendarmenmarkt was used as a parking lot. The cross streets remained, and lawns with some trees were left around the churches. During World War II, the square suffered massive damage. Both churches, their towers, and the theatre were almost completely destroyed by fire. However, structural elements and some facade sculptures survived. In 1950, the square was renamed Platz der Akademie in honor of the 250th anniversary of the German Academy of Sciences, which had been based here since 1946. Despite several plans, the square remained a field of ruins, until 1976, when the Socialist Unity Party Congress, its district leadership, and the city government decided to rebuild it as a cultural and intellectual center of the GDR. An ambitious project. The buildings were to be reconstructed historically, the Baroque street layout preserved, and the square, quote, through a clear paving structure, bring the historical buildings into full effect without the use of other plastic elements. The former cross streets were removed. The new green design followed the structure of the paving grid. Based on the idea of tree halls, spherical maple groves were planted along the western north and south sides of the square. The aim was to create a space usable for events, concerts and exhibitions, and also a place to linger and relax. It wasn't until 1984 that the theatre reopened, now as a concert hall. East Berlin now had a cultural counterpart to the Philharmonic Concert Hall in the West. In 1987, the French cathedral followed. Its interior was restored in a historicizing style. Today it houses the Huguenot Museum and an observation platform. The tower also received a carillon with 60 bells. In 1988, the restored Schiller monument was reinstalled. In 1991, the square regained its original name, Gendarmenmarkt. Since 1992, the square has regularly hosted the Classic Open Air, a concert highlight every July. The German cathedral was finally completed in 1996, true to the original exterior, modern and technically cool inside, with some preserved traces of its history. Since 2002, a permanent Bundestag exhibition on the history of parliamentarism has been on display, including a miniature version of the parliamentary chamber. In 2003, another annual event began. The Christmas market Weihnachtszauber Gendarmenmarkt, another chapter in the intense use of the square. With millions of visitors each year, this constant use left its mark. Cracked granite slabs, worn mosaic pavement, and asphalt patches. A renovation was already decided in 2009. But the planning dragged on for another 13 years. Initially, the Senate wanted to cut down all 115 spherical maples, to make the square completely barrier-free, or so it was said. A citizens' initiative prevented that. Even before renovation began, in 2021, Then Culture Senator Klaus Lederer placed the square's design and surrounding buildings under historic preservation. After all, the Gendarmenmarkt is considered, quote, the most significant urban square of the postmodern era in the GDR. The renovation was carried out by the state-owned company Grün Berlin. On their website, you can follow the process step by step. I'll link to that, as well as the publication I'm quoting from next. Climate adapted, monument appropriate, tourism friendly, and economically efficient. The unique open space in the center of Berlin has been carefully redesigned. 6,000 tons of natural stone paving were removed. The square now benefits from extensive underground infrastructure, drinking water, wastewater, and electricity. The utility network stretches over 5 kilometers, with more than 30 underground wastewater and retractable water connections, as well as underground electricity hookups. Events like the classic open air and the Christmas market can now be held without temporary cabling. This greatly shortens setup and teardown times. A sustainable rainwater system now collects valuable rainwater and returns it to the groundwater. This reduces the long-term costs of climate change and prevents local flooding. After the underground work was completed, new natural stone paving was laid. The mosaic pattern and paving slabs follow the previous layout. The historic look of the square is preserved, while also adapted to modern usage demands. The publication continues. The renovation and development of Gendarmenmarkt is a model project for harmoniously combining climate adaptation, historic preservation, and economic development. 14,000 square meters of paving were laid in total. The renovation cost 21 million euros. After the reopening, there was the usual media fuss, with headlines like 21 million for a concrete desert, how could this happen? Or Berlin's new 21 million euro stone desert, no space left for trees. The term stone desert is especially popular in the comments. But there are also positive voices. Beautiful and almost uplifting, that first walk across the Gendarmenmarkt, or looks pretty nice actually. Still, hardly anyone praised it without adding a but. One thing is clear, there are now significantly fewer trees. According to Grün Berlin, some trees had to be removed because, unlike the rest of the square, they couldn't be lowered. Others were no longer healthy. On the south side, 3 new Japanese pagoda trees were planted, known for their resistance to heat, drought, and air pollution. With a spreading crown of 12 to 18 meters, they should provide plenty of shade. The Friends of Gendarmenmarkt Association praised the historic preservation approach, but criticized the state of the trees behind the French cathedral. That part of the old tree population, they say, is, quote, shocking and shameful for Berlin. What do you think? Was this the right decision? Or should there have been more green added? I'm looking forward to your comments and feedback. As always, thanks for watching and for supporting this channel. See you next time.